In my wife's handbag, the one that cost more than my motorcycle, I found a tube of men's lubricant. On the package there was an iron tower and the words Nuit de Paris. I didn't argue with her. I didn't make a scene. I just went to my garage, got the iron grip industrial adhesive, the kind that could glue God's beard on, and made a little swap. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I decided to turn it into a piping hot comedy that would make the whole town laugh. And the show began when the fire department broke down the door to room 2107 of a certain little motel. It was a normal Tuesday, right after the annual Harvest Gala in Napa. As the owner of one of the oldest wineries in the valley, I, Jack Miller, had been hosting a group of suited-up clients and wine tasters. By the time I wrapped everything up and got home, it was nearly midnight. The house was quiet, dimly lit, with only the bedside lamp still on in the bedroom. Carol, my 50-year-old wife, who always dressed like she was heading to a luncheon in Beverly Hills, was already asleep, her soft, cat-like snores drifting from the bedroom. I went into the bathroom to clean up before bed, and that's when I saw it, her designer handbag. That damn purse, with a logo as big as a billboard, nearly as expensive as my beloved 1970s Harley-Davidson, was tossed carelessly on the bathroom floor. Its contents were spilled out like some modern art installation titled, "Who the Hell Cares?" Oh, this woman! I shook my head and bent down to pick up her things. Normally, I wouldn't go through my wife's purse. It violates the basic rules of marriage, right up there with using the bathroom with the door open or passing gas in front of her mother. But this time, on some good-willed impulse, I decided to tidy it up. That's when my hand brushed against a cool, smooth metal object that definitely didn't belong in the normal wife stuff category. I pulled it out and examined it under the light. It was a small silver tube, about 4 inches long, with an elegant design, covered in French, and featuring a little Eiffel Tower. It looked expensive and refined, like those little things from Paris Carol was always talking about. Definitely not something you'd pick up at the local CVS. My first thought was that it was some kind of medical product. Maybe Carol had an intimate health issue she needed to treat. But why was it in French? And why hadn't she ever mentioned it? Well, how interesting. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled out my phone and scanned the text with Google Lens. Ah, the wonders of modern technology. When you're standing in your bathroom at midnight, questioning everything you thought you knew about your marriage, Google Translate becomes your most loyal ally. The translation popped up on the screen, and I swear I felt my blood temperature drop 10 degrees. Nuit de Paris Premium Men's Lubricant. Long-lasting formula. Men's lubricant. Not women's, not for couples. For men. And the tube was already half empty, with clear signs of use. Holy crap. I examined the little tube over and over, my brain trying to process the facts before my eyes, while my gut was already screaming warnings from 3 steps back. Carol and I had never used anything like this, and even if we had, it definitely wouldn't have been this pricey imported stuff. This was definitely not intended for our bedroom activities. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub, staring at the little tube as if it might sprout legs and explain itself. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe Carol bought it as a gag gift for a friend's bachelorette party. Maybe a friend accidentally dropped it in her purse. Maybe. My gaze drifted involuntarily to her tablet on the counter, the screen still on, showing her neatly organized app folders. All the folders had cute names like leisure, work tools, and groceries. Wait, groceries? That's new. In our 30 years of marriage, I had never seen Carol use a grocery app. This was a woman who insisted I drive her to 3 different stores because she believed each one had its own good products. For her to suddenly have a groceries folder was as baffling as finding a whole slab of bacon in a vegetarian friend's fridge. My fingers hovered over the tablet for a moment, fighting an internal battle. This was the moment I either found out I was being paranoid or that my entire life was a lie. I opened the folder. There was only one app, with a deliberately ordinary icon, like some kind of messaging platform. I opened it, the messages loaded, and at the top was a contact named Lance. The profile picture was just a silhouette, but those messages, oh God, those messages, can't wait to see you Thursday. Already booked our usual spot at the Riverbend Inn. Remember to bring that thing? I like the silver one. Makes everything smoother. I'm going to do things to you your husband never has. Pretty direct. He was either talking about the lubricant or a new Lakers jersey. But I'm no idiot. I scrolled up and the whole conversation unfolded before me. Weeks of secret dates, descriptions of explicit photos, and specific mentions of that little silver tube. The timestamps hit my stomach like punches. Every working late at the office, every girls' night out, every "I'm too tired tonight, honey." They were all lies. The water was still running in the bathroom. Carol was humming some pop song as if her world was perfectly normal. As if she hadn't just destroyed our entire marriage with a half-empty tube of French lubricant and a secret chat app hidden in a fake groceries folder. I looked at the tablet again and noticed a document titled Our Bright Future. My God, the title was so cheesy it could have corroded my teeth. I opened it and found a detailed plan. Carol and Lance were planning to swindle the most valuable wine from my cellar, the Founder's Reserve, and run off with the money. The document was filled with sickeningly sweet comments and shopping lists for luxury items that nearly made me puke. The nerve of this woman. She wouldn't even respect my wine. I looked back at the little tube, then at the messages, then back at the tube. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. I started acting with a clarity of thought I didn't even know I possessed. I went to the kitchen, opened the junk drawer, and pulled out the tube of iron grip industrial strength superglue I'd bought last month to repair the grape press. If Carol wanted to play with expensive French lubricant, I swore I'd give her an unforgettable experience, an experience that she and that pretty boy would never, ever forget. I went back to the garage, carefully softened the plastic tube's nozzle with a hairdryer, then used a thin tool to squeeze out the contents. Finally, using a syringe, I injected the thick industrial glue. I sealed the opening perfectly with a hot glue gun and a tiny piece of plastic. The whole process was precise and professional, as if I were performing surgery and not preparing a revenge plot. The shower finally stopped. You know that feeling when you're watching a horror movie and you want to scream at the dumb blonde, "Don't go into the basement!" Well, now imagine you're the director and you've specifically designed the surprise in the basement. I quietly placed the modified little tube back in her handbag, exactly as it was, and then got into bed, pretending to be asleep. Carol came out of the bathroom like she was filming a shampoo commercial, wrapped only in that fluffy white towel she got me for Christmas 2 years ago. The towel that used to make my heart race when it accidentally fell off. Now it just looked like a costume she wore to play the part of a faithful wife. "Jack, honey, you still awake?" she said with that sweet, affected voice women use when they're hiding something. You know the tone? It's the one they use when they've accidentally spent $300 at Target but claim they only ran in for laundry detergent. "Barely," I mumbled, giving an ambiguous answer that could mean either, "Yes, it's been a long day," or, "I know you're having an affair with a guy named Lance." She went to the kitchen, our kitchen, in our house, the house we bought together when we still believed in the "till death do us part" vows. I could hear her moving around, opening cabinets, running the tap, the domestic sounds of a woman planning her next rendezvous while pretending to be an attentive wife. A few minutes later, she returned with a glass of wine, holding it out to me like a peace offering. "Drink this," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "It'll help you sleep better. You have that early meeting tomorrow, right?" Right, the early meeting. The one I'd mentioned casually over dinner that she had stored away in her treacherous little head as the perfect opportunity for another late-night fling. Why, nothing says faithful spouse like drugging your husband to sleep so you can sneak out for extramarital activities. I took the glass and studied her face in the dim light. She looked so sincere, so concerned about my sleep quality. If I didn't know the truth, I would have thought she actually cared about my well-being. But now I knew, didn't I? "Thanks, honey," I said, taking a small sip. It tasted normal, but I'm no expert. I wouldn't know what sleeping pills mixed with Cabernet would taste like. Maybe they were sleeping pills, maybe benzodiazepines, maybe nothing. But her sudden concern for my insomnia was too suspicious, like a wide receiver faking pass interference in a football game. I pretended to drink about half the glass, then placed it on the nightstand with a grateful smile. "You're so thoughtful, honey. I love you." The words felt like ash in my mouth, but her face lit up with what looked like genuine emotion. That was the most painful part. Not just that she was cheating on me, but that she could look at me with those love-filled eyes while planning to sneak off and roll around with some photographer named Lance. "I love you too," she whispered, leaning down to kiss my forehead like I was a sick child and not the husband she was about to betray. She slipped into bed beside me, and I could feel the warmth of her body through that towel. There was a time when that would have been my cue to move closer to her, to show her how much I'd missed her. Now it felt like lying next to a stranger wearing my wife's skin. "Rest well," she murmured, already turning her back to me. "You'll need your energy tomorrow." Oh, the irony. The irony was giving me goosebumps. Concerned about my energy levels while she planned to burn half her nightly calories with Mr. Lance. I wanted to ask if Lance knew she was drugging her husband, if that was part of their kinky little game, but I just mumbled some words of thanks and closed my eyes. The next hour might have been the longest 60 minutes of my life. I lay there listening to her breathing, waiting for it to settle into that steady, deep rhythm that meant she believed I was fast asleep. Every few minutes I'd let out a small snore or shift my position, putting on a sincere performance of a husband deeply sedated by drugs. If there were an Oscar for best performance in pretending to be asleep, I would have swept the awards. She was patient. I'll give her that. She waited a full hour before making her move, probably ensuring that whatever drugs she'd given me had plenty of time to take effect. I felt the mattress shift as she carefully slid out of bed, moving with the lightness of a ballerina. Clearly, this wasn't her first time performing this routine. I cracked one eye open just enough to see her silhouette in the dark. She had already changed into a black dress, that sexy one she usually reserved for our anniversary dinners. She was putting on makeup at the vanity, with a seriousness she normally reserved only for special occasions as she applied her lipstick. At 12:45 in the morning, I heard our front door open softly. Then, soft voices out in the apartment hallway. My heart was pounding so hard, I was sure the neighbors could hear it through the walls. Click-clack, the mouse had fallen into the trap. I gave her exactly 20 seconds, long enough for her to think she was in the clear, but not so long that they would be completely gone. Then I slipped out of bed, grabbed my robe, and crept to the door like some kind of suburban ninja. The hallway light was dim, but I could see them at the far end, near the elevator. Carol was pressed against the wall, and a tall man had his hands on either side of her face, kissing her like she was the last woman on earth. Even from a distance, I could see he was completely different from me. Tall, muscular, probably 10 years younger. So this was Lance. This was the man my wife thought was worth throwing away 15 years of marriage for. When they broke apart, I heard her whisper something that made him laugh. Then, they headed toward the stairwell, probably up to his apartment or down to a car. Either way, they walked with the confidence of people who had just committed the perfect crime. I waited until I heard the stairwell door close, and then I made my decision. The same clarity of thought returned, telling me exactly what I needed to do. I was going to see what these two were up to. I was going to follow them. After all, a man has a right to see exactly what he's losing, doesn't he? Let me tell you what it feels like to follow your cheating wife through your own apartment building at 1 a.m. It's like being the star of the world's most depressing reality TV show. Following the Adulterers, coming soon to a streaming platform near you, starring me, a foolish husband about to witness the collapse of his own life. I slipped down the hallway like a cheap private eye. The stairwell door was still swinging slightly, which meant they hadn't gone far. I pressed my ear against the cold metal door, listening for footsteps, voices, any clue that would tell me which direction they'd gone. That's when I heard a faint thud from above, followed by what sounded like muffled laughter. They were going up to the 4th floor, which was interesting because, as far as I knew, we didn't know anyone on the 4th floor. Although, it now seemed there was a lot I didn't know about my wife's social circle. I opened the door silently and started up the stairs, stepping on the outer edge of each tread where it was least likely to creak. Don't ask how I know this. Probably from watching too many episodes of Criminal Minds on those nights when Carol claimed to be too tired for anything but sleep. The 4th floor hallway was identical to ours, except everything was a mirror image. The same beige walls, the same industrial carpet, the same fluorescent lights that made everyone look like they had tuberculosis. I could hear sounds coming from apartment 4C, which was directly above our guest room. As I always say, man proposes, and God disposes. How cosmically ironic. My wife's lover lived right above us, probably listening to our arguments about whose turn it was to take out the trash while planning his next romantic rendezvous with my supposedly faithful wife. I leaned against the wall next to apartment 4C, feeling like a character in some low-budget thriller, too tight on cash to afford real sets. The door was cheap hollow core, allowing you to hear everything from normal conversations to sneezes to what was evidently a marriage crumbling in real time. "I can't believe you live right above him," Carol said, and I could hear the thrill in her voice, that tone she used to use when we'd sneak away for a weekend, back when she still pretended to find me interesting. "Doesn't it make it more exciting?" This was Lance's voice, deep, confident, with a slight accent I couldn't place, probably European. Women always went crazy for European men, as if having a different passport automatically made you better in bed. "God, yes. Sometimes I can hear him watching TV downstairs, and I think about you waiting for me up here." I wanted to either throw up or break something, preferably his smug face. Instead, I just stood there like a masochist, listening to my wife discuss how much she enjoyed the geographical convenience of her infidelity. "Did you bring what I asked for?" "Of course," I could almost hear her smiling. "I brought the one you like, the good stuff." "The good stuff, quite spicy. My specially modified French lubricant, now with industrial adhesive probably strong enough to hold a space shuttle together." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. There were some rustling noises, probably Carol digging through her purse, then a sound like someone unscrewing a cap. My heart was beating so fast I was sure they could hear it through the wall. "Perfect," Lance said. "You know how much I love it when you come prepared." "Oh, buddy," I thought, "you have no idea how prepared she is tonight." I heard footsteps moving away from the door, deeper into the apartment. The sounds became muffled, but I could still make out the general tone. Flirting, giggling, getting ready for what they thought would be another successful night of marital infidelity. The apartment was quiet for a few minutes, which probably meant they were getting started. I imagined Lance lying on his cheap furniture, probably pleased with himself for landing a married woman who lived downstairs, who even brought her own supplies. Then I heard Carol's voice. "Just relax. This is going to be great. That's the last true thing you'll say tonight, my dear." For about 30 seconds, there were only the sounds you'd expect from two people about to have the time of their lives. Some movement, some heavy breathing, the general audio backdrop of two adults about to find out that karma has an extremely twisted sense of humor. Then everything changed. "What the hell?" Lance's voice sharp and confused. "Wait, something's not right," Carol said, and I could hear the first hint of panic in her voice. "What did you do to me?" Lance said again, his voice rising. "What the hell did you put on me?" "I don't understand." Carol sounded genuinely confused, which would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. "It's the usual stuff. The silver one. The French brand you like." "Well, something is not right." "We can't. Oh my God, we're stuck." Divine justice? There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. The sweet, sweet sound of two cheaters realizing their night of passion had just turned into a medical emergency. I pressed myself against the door, grinning like a maniac, listening as their panic steadily escalated. "Don't pull, Carol. You're making it worse." "How can I not pull? We're literally glued together." "That's impossible. It's lubricant, not glue." Oh, my sweet, foolish wife. One moment a heroine, the next a jackass. If only you knew how wrong you are. The next few minutes were like listening to the world's most satisfying comedy sketch. They tried everything. Tap water, bathroom soap, even what sounded like cooking oil. Nothing worked. The industrial-strength superglue was doing exactly what it was designed to do, create a permanent bond between two surfaces. In this case, those surfaces just happened to be the intimate parts of my cheating wife and her boyfriend. "We need to call someone," Lance said, his voice strained with pain and embarrassment. "Who? What would we say?" "I don't know. A doctor, an ambulance." God, this is so humiliating. You haven't tasted real humiliation yet, my dear. This is just the appetizer. At that moment, I pulled out my phone and dialed a number, my cousin Mike, the Napa fire chief. This guy, loud enough to wake the dead, had an unhealthy enthusiasm for town gossip. "Mike, it's me, Jack," I said through a voice distorter, sounding like an old woman. "There's an emergency at the Riverbend Inn, apartment 4C. Sounds like someone is trapped, screaming for help. Very dangerous. I think you should get your team there right away." After about 40 minutes of painful attempts to separate themselves, they finally gave up. I heard Lance make the call. "Yeah, we need an ambulance. This is, hard to explain. We're sort of stuck together." I decided that was my cue to leave. After all, I didn't want to be standing in the hallway when the emergency personnel arrived. That would be awkward for everyone. But as I walked back toward the stairs, I couldn't help but smile. This was only the first act. The show had just begun. I slipped back into our apartment, finding a perfect observation post in the hallway by the front door. Through the peephole, I could see the elevator and most of the hallway, which meant I was about to have front row seats to the most interesting medical emergency in our building's history. The sounds from upstairs had escalated from panicked whispers to full-blown crisis mode. I could now hear Lance's voice through the ceiling, growing more desperate with each passing minute. "This isn't working. Nothing is working. Stop shouting, Carol." But even his whispers were loud enough to carry through the thin walls. "The neighbors will hear you." Oh dear, the neighbors are all awake now and with their phones ready. The neighbors would definitely hear and see and probably even record the whole thing on their phones, because this is 2024. And nothing stays private, especially when it involves two naked people glued together like some kind of erotic performance art. I heard footsteps in the upstairs hallway, then the sound of Lance's door opening. "Yes, we just called to report an emergency," his voice strained, talking on the phone. "We're on the 4th floor, apartment 4C. Please be discreet." Discreet? What a joke. Discreet? Yeah? Because there's a discreet way to handle two adults who have superglued themselves together during an affair. It would be about as discreet as setting off fireworks in a library. About 10 minutes later, I heard the elevator ding, followed by heavy footsteps and the sound of equipment being rolled. The paramedics had arrived, and they were well equipped. But with them came more footsteps, Mike and his firefighters, storming in with their typical drama. They had probably gotten a report of trapped people and decided to break down the door. "Napa Fire Department, anyone need help?" Mike's voice boomed, and I could just picture the scene of him kicking in the door. "Holy hell? What's going on in here?" I could now hear multiple voices, awkward laughter, rushed professional instructions, and Carol's sobs of embarrassment. It was a perfect symphony of chaos. "We need to separate them," one paramedic said. "But this glue, good heavens, it's industrial grade." "Someone take pictures for medical documentation," Mike said loudly, but I knew those pictures would never be for medical records alone. Make room, we need to move them," the paramedics were ordering. "We need a gurney. No, we need two connected. Oh hell, just use a big one." The chaos continued for nearly 20 minutes until I finally heard them decide how to transport the glued couple to the hospital. "Cover them with a sheet. Is that more dignified?" Dignity? That was lost when they decided to betray me. I scoffed to myself. The paramedics were clearly doing their best to remain professional, but the situation was so ridiculous that I heard several stifled laughs. Then came the best part. I heard the sound of the gurney being wheeled out, the door opened, and the whole scene unfolded right in front of my peephole. A large gurney, covered with a thin sheet, under which there were clearly two people connected in an extremely awkward position. Paramedics and firefighters were escorting this bizarre entourage toward the elevator, and it seemed like every resident in the building had appeared in the hallway, sleepy but excited to see this midnight spectacle. I heard camera shutters, saw phone flashes. Mrs. Gable from 3B had her phone out. Of course, the college kids from 2A were trying to look cool, but they were obviously recording everything. Even grumpy old Mr. Henderson from the ground floor had emerged from his cave to see what all the fuss was about. "This is better than late-night TV," one neighbor said to another. "Are they stuck together?" another asked. "Oh my God, yes. Look at that position." The elevator doors closed, leaving only the buzz of neighbors excitedly discussing what they had just witnessed. I waited a few more minutes, then opened my door and stepped into the hallway, pretending I had just been woken up by the noise. Crazy night, huh? Mrs. Gable said, still clutching her phone tightly. Did you see what happened? I shook my head, putting on my most confused neighbor expression. I heard the ambulance sirens, but I was sleeping. What happened? 2 people got stuck together somehow, she said, her eyes glinting with gossip. They had to put them both on the same gurney to get them to the hospital. Stuck together? How did that happen? Well, she leaned in conspiratorially. From what I heard, they were, in an intimate moment, and something went wrong with some product they were using. And guess who it was? Your wife Carol and that photographer Lance who lives in 4C. I made the appropriate shocked sounds, eyes wide, hand over my mouth. Impossible? Carol was working late tonight. I was sleeping. Oh, you poor dear, Mrs. Gable patted my shoulder. It looks like someone has been cheating on you. But don't worry, I recorded everything. If you need proof for the divorce. I think I need to lie down for a bit, I mumbled, stumbling back into the apartment, closing the door and leaning against it, unable to contain my smile. I poured myself a very large, very well-deserved glass of the best wine from our cellar. Glass in hand, I sat in the dark and toasted the moon outside the window. To revenge, a dish that is never served too late. Phase 1 complete. You know what they call the walk of shame? Well, when you've been surgically separated from your lover after being superglued together like some perverted science experiment, it's less of a walk and more of a waddle. A very careful, very painful waddle that makes you look like you've been run over by a truck driven by karma itself. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reading the news on my tablet, just like any normal husband whose wife hadn't spent the night glued to another man. When I heard keys in the lock around 10:30 a.m., it meant they'd been at the hospital for about 9 hours. 9 hours. I can only imagine it was the most humiliating medical experience in the history of emergency medicine. The door opened slowly, as if the person on the other side was afraid of what they might find. Or maybe they were just moving carefully because every step might feel like walking on broken glass. Either way, the first thing to appear was Carol. My God, she looked like she'd been put in a blender and then poured out. Her hair was a mess. That perfectly coiffed style from last night had been replaced by one that screamed, "I've been stuck in a hospital bed for 9 hours, trying to explain to medical professionals why I was attached to a man who isn't my husband." Her makeup was completely gone, leaving a pale, haggard face and dark circles under her eyes that made her look 10 years older overnight. But what really sold the "I've made some very poor life choices" look was the way she moved. She was hobbling, as if every step was torture. Her legs were slightly apart, indicating that sitting down would be an adventure for the foreseeable future. Her dress, that sexy black dress she'd put on to seduce Lance, was now wrinkled and stained with what looked like hospital-grade disinfectant. "Morning, dear," I said, not looking up. "How was your night?" "You got back awfully late." She froze in the doorway like a deer in headlights, probably trying to recall whatever cover story she'd concocted in the ambulance. There was an emergency at the office, a client crisis. I had to stay up all night to sort it out." Emergency? A client crisis? Honey, you really know how to spin a tale. She wasn't wrong. There was definitely an emergency. It definitely caused a crisis, just not the kind she was implying. "Too bad," I said, finally looking up and putting on my most concerned husband expression. "You look exhausted. Wait, are you walking funny? Did you hurt yourself?" The look on her face was priceless. She was trying to maintain the illusion that she'd spent the whole night dealing with spreadsheets and conference calls, while simultaneously trying to explain why she looked like she'd been tortured by a medieval device. I fell at the office, hurt my back." "You fell?" "Sure, you fell on top of Lance. Definitely one way to describe the superglue incident after being surgically separated from your lover." "Oh no, did you go to the doctor? You should get that checked out." "I did," she said quickly. I went to an urgent care clinic. They said it was just a sprain. They gave me some painkillers." She was now limping toward the bedroom, probably desperate to get out of that dress and into something that didn't smell of medical disinfectant and bad decisions. But before she could escape, the doorbell rang again. I got up to answer it, though I had a pretty good idea who it would be. Sure enough, It was Lance, looking like he'd just gone 12 rounds with a heavyweight boxer who specialized in groin punches. He was tall, I'll give him that. About 6'2", with that lean muscle that comes from regular gym time and a metabolism that hasn't yet been destroyed by 15 years of marriage and stress drinking. His hair was black, messy in that carefully engineered way to look casual, the kind of effect that takes about an hour to achieve. His ridiculous handlebar mustache had been half shaved off. Probably the doctors had to do it for the surgery. Under normal circumstances, most women would probably have called him handsome. These were not normal circumstances. His jeans were unbuttoned at the top, hanging loose on his waist as if he couldn't bear to have anything touch the skin there. He moved with the same caution as Carol. His face had that grayish tint that comes from spending all night under fluorescent lights, while medical professionals discuss your genitals in clinical terms. Hey, he said, his voice shaky. Is Carol here? We need to talk about what happened last night. What happened last night? You mean when you two got stuck together like two slices of bread with glue? As if this were some natural disaster and not the predictable result of adultery meeting industrial-grade adhesive. Of course, come on in, I said, stepping aside with a friendly smile. Carol just got back from work. She had some kind of emergency that kept her out all night. Lance's eyes widened slightly, and I saw him glance toward the bedroom where Carol had disappeared, probably wondering if she had concocted some elaborate cover story. If so, which version should he stick to? Right, he said slowly. Work emergency. You know, I continued, closing the door behind him, crisis management, damage control, trying to fix something that's gone completely wrong. Sometimes these situations require very delicate handling. I was laying it on a bit thick, but I couldn't help it. This guy was standing in my living room, probably still feeling the effects of whatever industrial solvent they used to separate him from my wife. And he had no idea that I was fully aware of what kind of emergency had kept them busy all night. Carol emerged from the bedroom, wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, the kind of outfit that screams, I am not okay and I don't want anything touching my body. When she saw Lance standing in our living room, her face went through about 17 different expressions in 2 seconds. Lance, she said, her voice carefully controlled, what are you doing here? We need to discuss last night's situation. They were both speaking in code, trying to discuss their medical emergency without revealing any information that might tip me off. It was like watching two people trying to discuss a bank robbery using only vocabulary that would be found in a children's book. Maybe you two should sit down, I suggested helpfully. You both look like you're in pain. The look they exchanged was pure panic. Obviously, sitting was not on the agenda for either of them, which means the hospital visit had been more traumatic than I imagined. Actually, I think I need to lie down, Carol said quickly. The painkillers are making me dizzy. And I should go, Lance added. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Of course she's okay, I said, putting my arm around Carol's shoulders. She flinched when I touched her, but tried to play it off as fatigue. My wife is strong. She can handle any challenge life throws at her. Lance nodded awkwardly, heading for the door, moving like a cowboy who's been in the saddle too long. I'll call you later about that project. Okay, Carol said weakly. That project. After he left, Carol collapsed onto the couch, letting out a groan that she tried to disguise as a yawn. I think I'm getting sick, she said. Maybe you should sleep in the guest room tonight. I don't want to get you sick. Oh, I'm pretty sure what she has isn't contagious. Unless stupidity and adultery are communicable diseases, which, come to think of it, might explain a lot of human behavior. Of course, dear, I said, bringing her a glass of water. You just rest. I'll take care of everything. And I would. Starting with planning phase 2. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but I've always preferred to enjoy it hot with a side of public humiliation. After all, when your cheating wife is already walking like she's been kicked by a mule, why not add a little spice to her recovery process? I spent the rest of the afternoon playing the part of the faithful husband, putting on a performance that would have made Meryl Streep weep. I brought Carol pillows, adjusted the thermostat, asked every 20 minutes if she needed anything, generally acting like a man whose only concern was his wife's mysterious work-related injury. She was milking it for all it was worth. Of course, every movement was accompanied by groans of pain. Every shift in position required a dramatic intake of breath. She had even developed a small, pathetic whimper that she'd let out when she thought I wasn't looking directly at her. It was like watching a one-woman show of The Suffering Wife, performed by someone who had never experienced real pain but had watched a lot of daytime soap operas. "I think I need to eat something," she said around 4 p.m. from her carefully arranged position on the couch like a wounded princess. "But my stomach is really sensitive right now. Maybe something light." Oh, her stomach is sensitive. How amusing. I wondered if this was related to the stress of spending 9 hours in the hospital explaining to medical professionals why she was anatomically connected to a man who wasn't her husband, or if it was just a side effect of whatever painkillers they'd given her. "Of course, honey," I said, already walking toward the kitchen. "I'll make something special. You just rest. So special you'll never forget it." Special, indeed. Ever since she limped through our front door, looking like a walking advertisement for the consequences of adultery, I had been planning this meal. It would be a symphony of spiciness, a carefully orchestrated assault on her already compromised digestive system. I started with lamb skewers, but not the kind you'd have at a normal barbecue. I marinated the meat in a seasoning that would make Mexican chili peppers file for a restraining order. Ghost pepper powder, Carolina Reaper flakes, habanero sauce, plus enough paprika to strip paint. Then I added a few Thai bird's eye chilies for texture and a generous dose of mustard sauce, because why not? While the meat was absorbing its payload of thermal weapons, I moved on to the garlic shrimp. I like garlic as much as the next guy, but this was garlic with a purpose. I used about 10 cloves of garlic, where a normal recipe would call for 2. Then I added garlic powder, garlic salt, and a bit of black garlic I'd been saving for a special occasion. The shrimp were swimming in enough garlic to ward off every vampire in 5 counties. But the piece de resistance was the chili crab. I ordered it from that Singaporean place downtown, the one that advertises its authentic volcanic heat and makes you sign a liability waiver before they'll serve you their spiciest dishes. This wasn't just food. It was a weaponized dining experience with its own fire extinguisher. "Smells good," Carol called out from the living room, her voice still in that pathetic, wounded tone. "What are you making?" "Just a few of your favorites," I called back, smiling as I arranged everything on a platter that looked like it belonged in a 5-star restaurant. "I know you've been under a lot of stress lately, so I wanted to do something special." "Stress? Ha, you don't know what stress is yet." "Yes, nothing elevates those stress levels like being surgically separated from your lover." I put the feast on a tray, complete with cloth napkins and our best silverware. Beautifully presented, restaurant-level plating, hiding the fact that I had actually created a meal specifically designed to torture someone with an already compromised gut. "Oh, wow," Carol said, struggling to sit up on the couch. "This looks amazing. You really didn't have to go to all this trouble." "No trouble at all," I assured her, setting the tray on the coffee table within her reach. "I know how much you love spicy food. And after the night you've had, I figured you could use some comfort food." "Comfort food? Huh. Hell's Gate's more like it." There was the beauty of my plan. Carol actually enjoys spicy food. Under normal circumstances, she can handle the kind of heat that would send most people running for milk. But these weren't normal circumstances, were they? Her entire digestive system was probably already in a state of rebellion from the stress, the painkillers, and whatever hospital food they'd forced her to eat in her medical hell. She took the first bite of the lamb, and I watched her face like a hawk studying a field mouse. For a moment, her expression was one of pure appreciation. The meat was cooked perfectly. The flavors were complex and balanced. Under any other circumstances, it would have been a truly excellent meal. Then the heat hit. It started with her eyes widening slightly, followed by a pause and chewing, then a very careful swallow that indicated she was already starting to regret her life choices. But she was committed now, trapped by the need to maintain her everything is fine facade. "This is really good," she said, reaching for her water glass a little too quickly to be casual. "Very flavorful." Flavorful, yes. Flavorful like the flames of hell. Flavorful, that's one way to put it. She bravely finished the shrimp, each bite requiring more water and longer pauses. The garlic was doing its job. I could see beads of sweat forming on her forehead, even though our apartment was kept at a comfortable 72 degrees. But it was the chili crab that really sealed the deal. She took one bite and I saw her entire body tense up, as if she'd been electrocuted. Her face turned red, then white, then an interesting shade of green I'd never seen on a human being before. I need to, she started to say, then stopped. Probably because talking required breathing, and breathing was currently not her friend. More water? I asked helpfully, already refilling her glass. The crab is really spicy. I probably should have warned you. She nodded desperately, chugging the entire glass in 3 swallows. But the damage was already done. I could almost see the heat working its way through her system, adding insult to injury in places that were already sore from the medical adventure. Maybe I should lie down, she said weakly. I think the medication is interacting with the food. Of course, I said, all concern and sympathy. You should get some rest. I'll clean up here. She struggled to her feet, moving even more carefully than before, stumbling toward the bedroom like a woman crossing a minefield. Every step looked like torture, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. As she disappeared down the hall, I heard my phone buzz with a text message. It was my friend Mark, who works at the hospital. Dude, you won't believe the case that came into the ER last night. 2 people glued together during sex. We had to call in specialists to separate them. Funniest thing I've ever seen, I replied. Seriously? That's crazy. Are they okay? Physically, they'll eventually be fine, but the guy developed an infection at the separation site, had to be hospitalized for antibiotics. The woman was sent home, but she's going to be uncomfortable for a while. Infection. Good. Let him suffer a bit more. Things were getting worse for Lance, which meant Phase 3 would be even more effective than I'd planned. I finished cleaning the kitchen, then set up my next surprise. Tucked away in our medicine cabinet, behind the aspirin and the Band-Aids, was a tube of recovery ointment that Carol would probably need in the coming days. It was a seemingly harmless product designed to soothe irritated skin and promote healing. It was also about to be replaced with something that would turn her recovery process into a whole new level of hell. I unscrewed the cap, squeezed the contents into the sink. Then I refilled the tube with capsaicin cream, the kind used to treat arthritis pain, with the same active ingredient that makes pepper spray so effective. It looked exactly like the original ointment, same color, same consistency. But when Carol applied it to her sensitive area tomorrow morning, she would discover that some consequences just keep on giving. I placed the tube back in its spot and got ready for bed. Phase 3 was all set. You know that moment in horror movies when the victim finally realizes they're not dealing with random accidents, but with someone who has been planning their doom all along. Well, I had the privilege of witnessing that moment in real life. And let me tell you, it was more satisfying than drinking a glass of perfectly aged Cabernet on a cold winter night. It all started with a scream around 6 a.m., loud enough to wake the dead. Not just any scream, it was the kind of primal, from the depths of the lungs scream that comes from someone who has just discovered that their day is about to go from bad to, please kill me now. It came from our bathroom, followed immediately by what sounded like someone trying to put out a fire with their bare hands. I was already awake, of course, had been for about an hour, lying in the guest room bed, listening for the exact moment when Carol would apply what she thought was healing ointment to her already traumatized anatomical parts. The anticipation was almost killing me, like waiting for the finale of the world's most twisted reality show. "Oh my God," she shrieked, and I heard something clatter to the bathroom floor, probably the ointment tube hitting the ceramic tiles as she realized that the thing that was supposed to heal her was setting her on fire from the inside out. I gave it exactly 10 seconds, long enough for the capsaicin to really kick in, but not so long that she'd start to get suspicious because I wasn't rushing to her aid. Then I jumped out of bed and ran to the bathroom, playing the part of the concerned husband. "Carol, what's wrong?" I yelled through the door, which was locked. Smart woman. She'd developed trust issues about people seeing her in vulnerable states. I wonder why. "The medicine? It's gone wrong," she gasped between what sounded like hyperventilating. "It's burning. Oh God, it's burning." "What medicine?" "The ointment from the hospital." "Yes. No, I don't know. Make it stop. Please." I could hear water running, which meant she was probably trying to rinse the cream off. Unfortunately, capsaicin is oil-based, which means water would only spread it around. It was like trying to put out a grease fire with a garden hose. You'd only make the problem worse. "Honey, unlock the door. Let me help you." The lock clicked and the door swung open unsteadily, revealing a scene that would have been comical if it hadn't been so perfectly orchestrated. Carol was bent over the sink, with the desperation of someone trying to escape hell, splashing water on herself. Her face was red and blotchy with tears, her hair was soaked. She was making these little sobbing sounds that might have touched my heart if I still had any soft spots left for her. "I can't make it stop," she sobbed. "The burning won't stop. Something is wrong with the tube." I looked down at the fallen tube on the floor, my masterpiece splayed across the bathroom tiles. "How strange," I said, picking it up and examining it as if I'd never seen it before. "Isn't this the brand you always use?" "I don't know. Maybe they changed the formula. Maybe it's expired. I don't care what it is. Just make it stop." The beauty of capsaicin is that it's not just a burning sensation. It creates a deep, penetrating heat that feels like it's coming from inside your bones. Once it makes contact with sensitive tissue, especially tissue already traumatized by an emergency medical separation procedure, it becomes a pain that makes you question every decision you've ever made. "We need to get you to the hospital," I said, wrapping her trembling shoulders in a towel. "This isn't normal. You could be having an allergic reaction to something." "I can't go back there," she whispered, "not after last night." Ah, there it is. Guilty as charged, admitting that last night wasn't just a work emergency. She was so focused on the burning sensation between her legs that she let her guard down, revealing that she had reasons to avoid the hospital beyond simple embarrassment. "Honey, this is serious. You're in real pain, and I'm worried about infections or complications from your fall yesterday." Her fall, right? Even as she was experiencing what felt like napalm smeared on her most intimate areas, we were still maintaining this fiction. "I can't," she said again, but I could see the resolve crumbling. The pain was overpowering her pride, which was exactly what I'd counted on. "Look at me," I said, taking her face in my hands with all the tenderness of a loyal husband. "I love you. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, but this is not something we can handle at home." The drive to the hospital was a symphony of agony. Carol couldn't sit normally in the passenger seat. She was half lying, half squatting, trying to find a position that didn't intensify the burning sensation. Every bump in the road sent a new wave of suffering through her. She was gripping the door handle so tightly, I thought she might rip it off. "How could this happen?" she kept asking. If only she knew the answer to that question. If only she understood that every moment of pain she was experiencing was a direct result of her choices, her lies, her betrayal of trust. But that level of self-awareness was probably beyond her capabilities right now. We pulled up to the emergency entrance, the same one she'd been wheeled out of less than 12 hours ago, still attached to her lover like some kind of erotic Siamese twins. The irony was not lost on me, and I had to suppress a smile as I helped her out of the car. The triage nurse took one look at Carol's condition and immediately moved her to a private room. Being a regular customer definitely has its perks, especially when your last visit involved being surgically separated from someone who isn't your spouse. Dr. Araujo, the same one who oversaw the separation procedure, walked in with an expression that said he was either having the strangest week of his medical career or he'd stepped into some parallel universe where people's sex lives had declared war on basic anatomy. "Mrs. Miller," he said, consulting her chart, "back so soon? What seems to be the trouble?" Carol tried to explain about the ointment, the burning sensation, and the reaction she was having. Dr. Araujo listened with professional patience, the kind that comes from years of dealing with medical enigmas. But I could see the concern growing in his eyes as he examined her. "The level of inflammation is severe," he said finally. "The tissue trauma from yesterday's surgery, combined with what appears to be a chemical burn, has created a potentially serious situation." "Chemical burn?" "This is more serious than a butt on fire." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Are you sure about the ointment she used?" he asked. "Why, this reaction is consistent with exposure to capsaicin or a similar irritant." Carol looked confused, which is understandable, since she didn't know her loving husband had been chemically experimenting with her recovery products. "I used the tube I always use," she said weakly. "But something was wrong with it." Dr. Araujo nodded thoughtfully. "Given the extent of the damage and the risk of infection, I'm recommending surgical intervention. We need to remove the affected tissue before necrosis sets in. Necrosis. That's a word that gets your attention. It means tissue death, permanent damage, the kind of consequence that doesn't just heal itself with time and good intentions. Surgery? Carol's voice was barely a whisper. I'm afraid so. The combination of yesterday's trauma and today's chemical exposure has created a situation that is not suitable for conservative treatment. We need to remove the damaged tissue to give you the best chance of healing. I took her hand in support. Whatever you think is best, doctor. We just want her to get better. They brought in the consent forms, and I watched Carol sign away a piece of her body with trembling hands. She was crying now, not just from the physical pain, but from the dawning realization that her body would be permanently altered because of the events of the last 24 hours. How long will the recovery take? I asked, playing the part of the concerned husband perfectly. At least several weeks, Dr. Araujo replied, and there will be permanent changes. Some sensation may never return to normal. Permanent changes. That should permanently change your interest in cheating. Permanent changes. Some sensation may never return to normal. I filed these phrases away for future reference, feeling a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with the sterile hospital environment and everything to do with justice finally being served. As they wheeled Carol toward the operating room, she grabbed my hand one last time. I love you, she said, her voice thick with sedatives and fear. I love you too, I replied. And for the first time in months, I actually meant it. I loved this version of her, vulnerable, facing the consequences, finally paying for her betrayal. The surgery took 3 hours, and when Dr. Araujo came out to speak with me, his expression was grave. We were able to remove all the damaged tissue, he said, but the extent of the removal was greater than we initially hoped. She's going to need extensive follow-up care, and there will be permanent functional changes. I nodded solemnly, like a loyal husband receiving devastating news about his beloved wife. Deep down, I was already planning Phase 4. There's a profound poetry to serving your adulterous wife divorce papers while she's lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, recovering from a surgery that was a direct result of her own infidelity. It's as if the universe finally decided to co-write the perfect ending to a truly terrible love story. I spent the morning at the lawyer's office, finalizing the papers that had been prepared with a meticulous attention to detail that would make a Swiss watchmaker weep. Every clause, every provision, every legal maneuver designed to ensure that Carol walked away with exactly what she deserved from our marriage. Nothing. Well, almost nothing. She'd get to keep the medical bills. As I walked through the hospital corridors, the papers tucked neatly into a manila folder, I passed rooms filled with people dealing with actual accidents and legitimate medical emergencies. Not like my wife, who was now experiencing the long-term consequences of bad choices and industrial-grade glue. Room 347 was a private room, which I specifically requested and paid for out of my own pocket. Call it a gesture of goodwill. I wanted Carol to have privacy to deal with what was about to be the worst conversation of her life. The kind of privacy you need when your entire world is collapsing and you want to scream without disturbing other patients. When I entered the room, she was awake, propped up on pillows, looking like she'd aged about 15 years in the last 2 days. According to Dr. Araujo, the surgery had gone well, but the recovery would be a long, uncomfortable process. In some ways, permanently uncomfortable. Hey, she said weakly, trying to manage a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I was wondering when you'd get here. The nurse said visiting hours started at 10. The traffic was a nightmare, I lied smoothly, sitting in the chair next to her bed. How are you feeling? Like I got hit by a truck. And then the truck backed up and hit me again. She shifted slightly and winced. The doctor says I need to stay here another day or 2, then recover at home for a few weeks. A few weeks of recovery. That's optimistic. From what doctor? Araujo had told me privately her recovery involved a lot more than just a few weeks of rest. We were talking permanent changes to her anatomy, ongoing medical appointments, and the kind of complications that would serve as a daily reminder of her choices. About that, I said, pulling the manila folder from my briefcase, we need to talk. Something in my tone must have triggered her survival instincts, because her expression shifted from medication-induced confusion to sharp alertness in about 2 seconds. She was suddenly very awake, very focused, and very aware that this conversation was not going to be about get-well-soon flowers and chicken soup. "What is that?" she asked, eyeing the folder as if it might contain a bomb. "Divorce papers," I said, placing them on the rolling table next to her bed with the same casualness I would deliver a pizza. "I need you to sign them." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the drip of the IV fluid, counting off the seconds. 1 drip, 2 drips, 3 drips, each one marking another moment of Carol's brain trying to process what I had just said. "What?" she finally whispered. I have to say, her timing was perfect. The word came out just as a particularly strong dose of painkillers in her system was kicking in, giving her voice an ethereal, disbelieving quality. "Divorce papers," I repeated, opening the folder and spreading the documents across the table like I was dealing cards. "Pretty straightforward. You get nothing. I get the house, the cars, the savings, the investments." She stared at the papers as if they were written in ancient Sanskrit. "I don't understand." "Why? Why now? I'm in the hospital. I just got out of surgery." "Well, that's kind of the point, isn't it?" I leaned back in the chair, crossing my legs as if we were discussing plans for the weekend and not the total destruction of her life. "Look, I know about Lance. I know about your affair. I know about the meetups at the Riverbend Inn, the messages, that silver tube of lubricant you've been using to enhance your extramarital activities." The color drained from her face so quickly I thought she might actually pass out. Her mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish out of water. If fish could experience existential terror, that is. "I know you've been drugging me so you could sneak off to your rendezvous. I know about the encrypted messaging app hidden in your groceries folder. I know Lance lives upstairs in 4C. I know last night's medical emergency was completely different from the work-related accident you claimed it was. And I know you were planning to steal my wine Founder's Reserve, period." Each revelation hit her like a physical blow. I could actually see her shrinking, as if someone were slowly letting the air out of her entire being. "How?" she managed to croak. "Does it matter? The point is I know. Now you're going to sign these papers, take responsibility for your choices, and get out of my life." She tried to sit up a little straighter, which was a mistake considering her current medical condition. The movement sent a wave of pain across her face, almost worth the price of admission. "You can't do this," she said, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. "Not like this, not when I'm hurt and vulnerable. Hurt and vulnerable, you two-faced hypocrite." I laughed, the sound coming out darker than I expected. "That's rich. You were perfectly capable of making choices when you were cheating on me behind my back. You were perfectly capable when you were planning hotel meetups and smearing lubricant on other men, but now that there are consequences, suddenly you're too hurt and vulnerable to face them." Lance is nothing to me," she said, and I could see the tears starting to form in her eyes. It was just physical. It was a mistake." "Mistake?" I let the word hang in the air between us. "You know what a mistake is, Carol? A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk on the way home. A mistake is double booking a dinner reservation. What you did was a series of conscious decisions made over a period of months, each one designed to betray the trust of the man who loves you. Not to mention you were also planning to steal the wine my grandfather left me." The tears were flowing freely now, and she was making those little sobbing noises people make when they're trying to cry silently. Under different circumstances, I might have felt bad for her, but these were not different circumstances. "Please," she whispered, "we can get through this. We can go to therapy. I'll do anything to make this up to you, anything." I leaned forward, genuinely curious. "Can you undo the affair? Can you give me back the nights I spent alone? Can you take back the lies, the deception, the complete betrayal of everything we built together?" She opened her mouth to answer, but I held up a hand to stop her. "Because if you can't do those things, and we both know you can't, then there is nothing to get through. There is only cleanup." I stood up, moving the papers closer to her bed. "Sign them, Carol. Accept that this is over, and try to maintain some dignity in its ending." She looked at the papers for a long time, then looked up at me, with something in her eyes that might have been hope. "You won't let me go that easily. I know your winery. I can tell everyone your wine is tainted. Looks like I need to teach you a deeper lesson. I pulled out my phone and showed her the screen. I have a video of you and Lance being wheeled out of the building on the same gurney. I have screenshots of your messages. I have documented evidence of your plan to steal my wine. Oh yeah, and I had that glass of wine analyzed. Sleeping pills, in case you were wondering. Her face went pale again, but this time with something that looked like genuine fear. You wouldn't do that. Think of your reputation. Reputation? Trust me, in Napa as a cheated husband I would only get sympathy, and you, as a traitor, would never be accepted again. With trembling hands she picked up the papers and tore them in half. I'm not signing anything, she said. For a moment there was a flash of the old Carol, defiant, stubborn, believing she could fight her way out of any situation. I smiled and pulled another set of documents from my briefcase. I was hoping you'd say that. What's that? The B plan. If you're not willing to sign the generous settlement I'm offering, we're going to court. In court, all of this becomes public record. The affair, the details of your medical emergency, the drugs, the robbery plan, all of it. You won't just lose everything. You'll be a pariah in the town where we've lived for 30 years. Is that really what you want? She stared at the second set of papers, and I could see that moment, the moment she realized she was finished. No way out, no clever legal maneuvers, no last-minute rescue, just the harsh, cruel reality that consequences had finally caught up with choices. But instead of accepting defeat gracefully, she did something I didn't expect. She started to laugh. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of broken, hysterical laughter people make when sanity finally gives up and goes home. It started as a giggle, then built into a full-throated cackle, echoing off the walls of the hospital room. You think you've won? She said between gasps. You think you're so smart, so clever, but you don't know what you've done. Enlighten me. Lance won't go away. Even if we divorce, even if you take everything, he'll still be there, and there are others too. Do you really think he was the first? Do you really think this was some kind of isolated incident? The words hit me like a slap, but I kept my expression neutral. Others? Oh, honey. Her voice was pure venom now. You have no idea how long this has been going on. Lance is just the most recent, the most convenient. But there have been others, lots of others. So there it was, the final revelation, turning my carefully planned revenge from a surgical strike into something much more comprehensive. I looked at my broken, hospitalized, soon-to-be ex-wife, realizing that Phase 4 was going to be much more extensive than I had originally planned. You know how they say the internet never forgets? Well, that's especially true when your adulterous wife and her lover are wheeled to the hospital in the most humiliating position imaginable, and half the people in your building own smartphones with HD video capability. Mrs. Gable from 3B really outdid herself. This woman, who usually spends her time recording her cat doing ordinary things, somehow managed to capture the entire ambulance scene in stunning 4K detail. The video was a masterpiece of accidental cinematography. It captured everything from the initial confusion of the paramedics to the moment they realized they needed a bigger gurney, to the final shot of Lance and Carol being wheeled away like some kind of erotic sculpture. The best part is, you could clearly see both their faces. I got a copy from Mrs. Gable, under the guise of wanting to make sure Carol was okay, which she bought because I had perfected my concerned husband act over the last few days. What she didn't know was that I had much bigger plans for her amateur footage than just checking on my wife's health. Within 6 hours of getting the video, I created accounts on every major social media platform: TikTok, Instagram, X, Facebook, Reddit, the whole digital ecosystem where shame reproduces like bacteria in a petri dish. The video went up, with carefully crafted captions that told just enough of the story to make it go viral, but without actually getting me sued for libel. When Cheating Goes Horribly Wrong was the title that really blew up. Simple, direct, guaranteed to make people click share faster than you can say, "Karma is a bitch." It turns out the internet has an insatiable appetite for watching other people's lives explode in spectacular fashion. Within 12 hours, the video had been viewed over 500,000 times. By day 2, it was trending on 3 different platforms. By day 3, it had spawned reaction videos, compilation clips, and even several remixed versions set to popular songs. But the real magic happened when people started recognizing them. "OMG, that's Lance from the photo studio in Napa," was one of the first comments that caught my eye. Apparently, Lance was some kind of photography influencer with a sizable following, marketing himself as a relationship coach and lifestyle guru. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Within hours, someone had completely doxed him. His full name, his photo studio, his Instagram handle, his business website, all laid bare on the internet for everyone to scrutinize and judge. And boy, did they judge. His clients canceled all their appointments within a week. Apparently, getting internet famous for being glued to a married woman during an affair wasn't the kind of publicity they were looking for. His Instagram account was flooded with comments, ranging from helpful advice on better lubricant choices to detailed descriptions of what people thought should happen to cheaters. But Lance's public execution was minimal compared to what Carol faced. Someone recognized her from a church community event. Another person knew her from their book club. A third identified her from the local yoga studio, where she'd been a regular for years. Once her identity was out, it spread like wildfire through our social circle. Her phone started ringing off the hook. Reporters, bloggers, random internet strangers who had somehow gotten her number. She made the mistake of keeping all her social media accounts public, which meant everyone could see her carefully crafted image of the perfect wife and mother going back years. The contrast between her online persona and the reality everyone had just witnessed was gold for internet trolls. They started posting side-by-side images. Carol's Instagram post, "Date night with my amazing husband," next to a screenshot from the ambulance video. Her Facebook post about loyalty and trust in marriage paired with a still image of her being wheeled away attached to another man. Her friends started to distance themselves from her one by one. The book club mysteriously had scheduling conflicts every time she tried to attend their meetings. The yoga studio suddenly couldn't find her membership in their system. Even the cashiers at the grocery store started giving her looks that could freeze hell over. But the real masterpiece came when I discovered something that made the affair with Lance look like amateur hour. Buried in her tablet's browser history, I found evidence that both chilled my blood and expanded my plan for revenge. She hadn't been lying about there being others, many others. It was a whole network. A private group that operated through encrypted apps and exclusive websites designed for married people looking for discreet encounters. This wasn't just casual infidelity. This was organized, systemized adultery with membership fees, background checks, and regular events. Carol had been a premium member for over 3 years. Damn, 3 years? 3 years? All the evidence was there. Hotel receipts, membership confirmations, even reviews she had written about other members. She had been living a completely double life, and I had been too stupid, too trusting to see it. But now I saw everything, and more importantly, I documented everything. I printed out every piece of evidence, compiled it into a comprehensive file, and walked straight to the police station. Not because adultery is illegal. Unfortunately, it is not. But the network itself involved some activities that definitely crossed legal lines. First, there was tax evasion. The organizers hadn't declared the membership fees as income. Then, there were the services involving monetary transactions. Some members paid others for services, which made it a commercial operation. And most importantly, several members were using corporate credit cards and expense accounts to fund their activities, which meant embezzlement and fraud. Detective Murphy listened to my story with an expression of someone who thought he'd seen it all, but was quickly discovering he was wrong. When I finished presenting my evidence, he just sat for a moment, shaking his head. "This is going to take a lot of people down," he said finally. "Good," I replied. "They should go down. Scum like this deserves to pay." Within a week, the investigation had expanded to include the FBI. Assets were frozen, arrests were made, and suddenly Carol wasn't just facing public humiliation, she was facing potential criminal charges. The local news picked up the story, and our small-town scandal became a national cautionary tale about modern marriage and digital infidelity. Carol's picture was on the evening news, identified as a key figure in an adultery ring that spanned multiple states. She stopped going out completely, stopped answering the phone, stopped responding to emails or texts. She had become a prisoner in our own home, afraid to face a world that now knew exactly who she was. And Lance, he just disappeared, fled town, shut down his social media accounts, vanished as if he'd never existed. It was actually a smart move. The internet has a long memory, but if you remove yourself from the equation, it gets easily distracted. But Carol couldn't disappear. She had too many connections, too many responsibilities, too much evidence linking her to everything. She was trapped, and she knew it. Phase 4 exceeded all expectations. 3 weeks later, Lance made the mistake of coming back. I was sitting in the winery, glass of precious Founder's Reserve in hand, enjoying the quiet solitude of having a property to myself when I heard raised voices from the front yard. Through the window, I could see Lance standing on our porch, gesturing furiously at Carol, who was blocking the doorway like she was defending a fortress instead of our house. The guy looked like he'd been living rough, unshaven, wrinkled clothes, with that desperation you only get when your entire life has exploded on social media. Apparently, disappearing hadn't gone as well as he'd hoped. The internet may have a short attention span, but debt collectors and angry clients have much longer memories. "You owe me $20,000, he shouted, his voice loud enough for the whole town to hear. "Medical expenses, lost income, legal fees. This is all your fault." Carol's voice shot back sharp and bitter. "My fault? You were the one who suggested using that stuff. I didn't tell you to bring damn superglue." Served on a silver platter. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. Even better, the neighbors were already at their windows, some even stepping out onto their porches, phones already out, probably live streaming the whole thing. Some people never learn. The argument escalated quickly. Lance pushed past Carol into the house. She followed him, and their voices carried through the thin walls as they continued their blame game in our house. Technically my house because the divorce papers had finally gone through. I could hear them moving around upstairs, probably in what used to be our bedroom. Lance's voice was getting louder, more aggressive, while Carol shot back with the kind of vicious fury that comes from someone with nothing left to lose. Then I heard the sound of a slap, then a thud, then more yelling, followed by what sounded like furniture being thrown around. I waited exactly 5 minutes, then called my contact at the police station. "Hello, Detective Murphy. It's me, Jack." "Yeah, it's happening again. Same address. Domestic dispute, possible assault. You probably want to send a few units over." By the time the police arrived, Lance was stumbling out of the house, holding his face where Carol had evidently hit him with some heavy object. She was following him onto the porch, screaming insults that would make a sailor blush. That's when Lance made his second mistake of the day. He shoved her. Carol went down hard on the concrete steps, and just then the officers decided they'd seen enough. Lance was in handcuffs before he could explain that he was just trying to get the money he was owed. When Carol tried to attack the officer arresting her lover, she was in handcuffs 30 seconds later. The beauty of having a criminal investigation already open is that any new charges just get added to the existing case file. Lance's assault charges became part of the larger fraud investigation. Carol's public disturbance and resisting arrest joined her embezzlement charges. When the dust settled, they were both facing considerable prison time. Afterwards, I decided it was time to face my community. I threw a grand barrel-tapping party, inviting the whole town to my winery to taste the real Founder's Reserve and celebrate the casting out of evil. I turned a family scandal into a town-wide celebration.